So the Amistad is a historical event that's generally covered in younger educational textbooks, elementary, junior high, and it's also been transformed to a Hollywood movie, actually, by Steven Spielberg. However, as one, I guess, somewhat cynically comes to expect from such things, it omits many of the key details. The details, of course, that we're going to discuss here today. So the series of events occurs in 1839, so we're very, if one can use the word, comfortably nestled in that time period in the antebellum era, with the growing tensions between the North and South. The Democratic Party by this point was wholly consumed with Calhounism and has long since dedicated itself to the expansion and protection through the federal level for slavery. So not merely maintenance of the slavery status quo in the slave states that originated in the founding, which was the original understanding of slavery, but instead to essentially pursue a slave empire. Now, in 1808, the earliest possible time, actually, pursuant to the Slave Trade Clause, the United States Congress passed a law that was largely written by and encouraged by Thomas Jefferson. And this law was the fourth in a series, but it prohibited the slave trade at the federal level internationally. So this was a very big deal, especially since it was a fulfillment of promises and guarantees made by many delegates to the Constitutional Convention who went back to their respective states, and when describing the usefulness, actually, of the Slave Trade Clause, that was one of the details they always included. Hey, don't worry, because in January 1st, 1808, we'll have this capability at the federal level. And the law was written, and the votes were counted, and as soon as January 1st rolled around, the law was passed. However, just because the United States was no longer participating in the slave trade did not mean that other nations were not. Britain passed a similar ban on international slave trade. I believe it was very close. I think it was 3 weeks after the United States did. So this resulted in slave patrols. And several other laws had actually provided incentives for their respective navies or even private vessels to commandeer slave trading vessels. Well, Spain and Portugal, especially at this period, were still just voracious slave trading nations. One such Spanish vessel, which is the Amistad, went to Africa, kidnapped some what they hoped would be slaves, and then departed with the intent of bringing them to Cuba. However, things did not go as planned, and the one slave, or rather captive to-be slave, was able to secure his freedom, free his fellow countrymen, and then take over the ship. And as a credit to their honor and their character, they only killed 2 people in this process, which is pretty amazing. But this is where things get a little more complicated. So the captives only insisted that they be returned home, and so the first mate, who was still alive, spared, if you will, because he didn't offer active resistance. He would steer the ship towards Africa during the day, and then when the captives all went to sleep at night, he would steer it away. So they ended up at open sea for quite some time and rather scattered. But ultimately they were found by a United States slave patrol. And it was this slave patrol then that commandeered the vessel, and then a lot of political machinations were immediately put to work. So Spain, or rather the Spanish Empire, petitioned and lobbied very heavily, very insistently, that the ship, its cargo, and the prospective slaves be sent directly to Cuba to stand trial for murder, mutiny, and all these other fun and glorious things that, of course, likely would have been sold into slavery after a kind of public show was made of the trial. There was a great reluctance in America for that to occur, at least in some realms. Unfortunately, the Democratic Party at this time, who was led by President Van Buren, they argued relentlessly to favor Spain, to give Spain what they wanted, to try the captives for murder, all number of things. And so ultimately, the case, due to political pressure, of course, the case is tried in an American court. But much to the terrific advantage of these unfortunate captives, although one doesn't want to paint them as helpless. Obviously, they were very capable men who secured their own freedom and, by the theory of natural rights, thus deserve it. They were represented by John Quincy Adams, and he was the son of John Adams, the founding father. And apparently, greatness is at least somewhat transmissible to our offspring. So Adams brought forward as one might expect, a beautiful defense of these captives. And he does more than that. He knows that this trial is very public, that it's very high profile, and he takes the opportunity to really highlight, just based on the factual events, kind of the dark influences at work. So Quincy, in very small part, which I would encourage you very much to read his arguments. They're available for free online, of course, and they are included in part in the Volume 2 reader once I have that out there. But in part, Mr. Adams argues, and I'm quote, "This sympathy with Spanish slave traders is declared by the Secretary to have been first felt by Lieutenant Gredney." Now, Gredney was the lieutenant on the vessel, on the American vessel that found the Amistad. Mr. Adams continues, "I hope this is not correctly represented. It is imputed to him and declared to have become in a manner national. The national sympathy with the slave traders of the Barracoons is officially declared to have been the prime motive of the action of government, and this fact is given as an answer to all the claims, demands, and reproaches of the Spanish minister. I cannot urge the same objection to this that was brought against the assertion in the libel, that it is said the thing which is not, too unfortunately it was so, as he said. The sympathy of the executive government, and as it were of the nation, in favor of the slave traders, and against these poor, unfortunate, helpless, tongueless, defenseless Africans, was the cause and foundation and motive of all these proceedings, and has brought this case up for trial before your honors." Now, he's presenting this, of course, to the Supreme Court. And what he's explaining here, quite simply, is what I just said. We're only, he's telling the court, we're here today because it was forced upon us by the Democratic Party. Of course, there was a level of civility maintained in back in those days that I haven't seen in my lifetime, and I would say that if you were born, I'd say prior to the FDR administration, you've also never seen. So 99% of people who might be listening to this podcast have never lived in a world with that level of political kind of purity and civility. He won't even call out the specific name of Democratic Party. He uses a much kinder phrase, the sympathy of the executive government. So in that, we could maybe learn something. But nonetheless, the substance of his arguments don't change. We're here because pro-slavery Democrats, including the president and congressmen and senators, wanted this to be a spectacle in the hope of satisfying Spain. which what you will have remembered, of course, from prior episodes is that the acquisition of Cuba from Spain in order to expand the slave power had long been a pursuit and goal of the Democratic Party, alongside the annexation of Texas and the acclamation of other lands through the Mexican-American War. Now, as one might expect, ultimately, Mr. Adams won, and he was personally thanked by the Amistad captives, which they referred to themselves as the Mende people, which one assumes is their tribe. And they purchased for him a Bible, and within that Bible they included a thank you note. And in this note, they write, presumably with some help, of course, "The Mende people give you thanks for all your kindness to them. They will never forget your defense of their rights before the great court at Washington. They feel that they owe to you, in a large measure, their deliverance from the Spaniards and from slavery or death. They will pray for you, Mr. Adams, as long as they live. May God bless and reward you." At the conclusion of the trial, the Mende captives were returned to their homeland with provisions at the cost of the U.S. government. Now, the tale has many renditions over time. The one I just described to you is observed purely through recognizable and demonstrable historical fact. But they all kind of skip, really, the most important details, which we just covered. First, that the slaves were actually captured by a Spanish trading vessel, which then requires us to kind of revisit the fact that other nations, aside from simply trafficking in slaves at numbers vastly superior to ours, which we've also covered in prior episodes, continued the slave trade for decades after the Western, we'll say specifically the United States and Britain, concluded any of their involvement in international slave trade. This particular case occurred just a little over 3 decades after the United States passed a federal law that made the slave traffic illegal. It's also generally omitted that the vessel that discovered and thus rescued the Amistad was an American vessel, and not just an American vessel, but one that was on official slave patrols. So the laws that we passed, and Britain deserves great acclamation for this as well. They had a wonderful navy at this time, and their navy was instrumental, especially in helping to combat the influence of Barbary pirates. But at this time, not only was the slave trade made illegal, but that was enforced through anti-slave vessel patrols. And what's also ignored is the role of the Democratic Party in the events, at least the political side of things. There would never have been a trial had there not been mounting political pressure by the Democratic Party, who, and their president especially. And with the convenience also afforded to us of historical hindsight in examining future events, this occurred in 1839, so this actually kind of precipitated the annexation of Texas, Mexican-American War, the Ostend Manifesto, and many other instances of Democrat Party slave expansionism at this time. But knowing what we do know about later events, the motivations for this particular occurrence also become quite clear, although an examination of the arguments presented really are pretty self-explanatory, that the purpose was to satisfy Spain and to pursue the friendly relations with the nation in the hopes of, again, expanding slave territory, and thus the slave power complex constantly at work, constantly attempting to grow in the United States at this time through the Democratic Party. So this event really should be a story of national pride, where the United States demonstrated its high morality despite the overwhelming power, really, at this point already, the political dominance of the Democrat Party. And we did so through our own court systems. So America played every key role that resulted in the freedom of these captives is owed to America. And of course, all of the circumstances that led to them being captured do not. And although, once again, though, I would say that the captives clearly deserve recognition for their manliness and their courage in securing their own freedom, at least as best as they could on this vessel. But of course, being unable to navigate, they were still largely disadvantaged. So this is just another event that demonstrates many of the ideas that we've been discussing previously. It reflects the anti-slavery nature of the United States, even at this period, which is well into the post-Calhounism, Democrat Party formation, irrepressible conflict kind of growing between the North and South, the slave and no slave factions. But despite that, America did the right thing here, and those details are generally omitted from modern retellings. But regardless, Amistad should resonate for every American as an opportunity for our forefathers to step up and do the right thing on behalf of enslaved Africans, and they did.